Good morning, good evening, good night, wherever it is that you are. Today we're gonna finish up those dragons to talk about my favorite ones, in fact. Last time we went over the chromatic and the metallic. They're very conflicting in their roles. They're the more classic ones, but like I said last time, the planar, gem, and etc., they tend to be the more crafty ones and fun ones for your gameplay. So I'll be finishing up those, and I have used them a little bit more than others when it came to my different campaigns or just writing. Sometimes you like to write just to write. Stream was a little late today. My power had went out, but then just came back on 5 minutes before stream time. So that was a treat. Now a lot of these you can see online. There's going to be a lot of different resources for these. Otherwise, your best bet is to get both Fizban's Treasury of Dragons and the Tyranny of Dragons. Tyranny of Dragons is a little bit of a morph of a couple books of resources. Those are very two good books, especially if you just want to see a lot of wonderful art and resources for anything dragon related. Fizban even goes over different dragon hoard aspects, things like tables for items that you could use and different magical items that you can include. It's truly one of my favorite things when it comes to D&D. And realistically, yes, in most games and most campaigns, you will not interact with the dragon. They can be a little villain in the story or main point later on. But I feel like there's a lot of potential for story making that you could do with them anyways. So first, we will go over planar dragons. They're ones that didn't really fit in the regular material plane that we usually play in when it comes to D&D. Sometimes they can be there, but from different planes like Shadowfell, Infernal Planes, all the above. And most of the time, they're not natural spellcasters either. They're kind of influenced for that plane of existence that they're from. Let's see here. And like my little piece here. The first one we're going over is the Shadow Dragon. They're usually seen as chaotic evil or just along the evil alignment as is. Mostly found underground for their terrains, but you'll most likely find them in Shadowfell, since they are a Shadow Dragon. Though realistically, they don't have to just come from there. They could also be a regular dragon that has been corrupted from being there too long. They even usually are seen to have translucent scales, so you can have them be very tricky to find for the party when they are in Shadowfell. Their camouflaging abilities gives them quite the speed. Oh, I totally There's also another point to these that I totally messed up. Most of the time, shadow dragons have their horns pointed forward instead, because at times they're mistaken for black dragons. I only draw them little, like, shadowy mist things, because I feel like that also kind of makes them seem a little bit different than a black dragon. Spines usually go down it as well, usually have fins involved. But I think it's funnier just to make them like a little puff of shadow. Technically too, you can have it that they're in Shadowfell for a dragon's egg from it. Sometimes they're little black gems or tinge of purple. Technically, if you hold them against the light, then they're more noticeable. So you can have them be something found in the dark. They're usually the more devious of them as well. When it comes to red dragons being considered one of the more powerful ones, shadow dragons are considered one of the more capable ones when it comes to mental capacity, mental ability. And probably on par with a lot of the metallic dragons when it comes to smart, their intelligence. But because of these things, it kind of evens out with them being fairly weak physically. Especially if you have other elements involved, like light spells and all this and that. But with physical strength, they're even considered a little bit lower than white dragons. You can sort of balance this out in your campaign of having them be the more lingering, stealthy, traumatic event for your party to deal with. Basically spooking them with the boogeyman until the boogeyman actually comes forward, and then they can kill them easily anyways. Since you have them sort of lingering in the darkness, especially for Shadowfell, you can have it to be a very cunning figure for the party to deal with. Adding in riddles, stealing from the party, this and that. They're very, if you want to go tricky with other things, that's where they kind of come in. Alright. Now for a different one. Shadow dragons. I haven't used one yet in D&D. I should. But I feel like a lot of people will be very upset with me if I do, because I will absolutely use them to extreme lengths. The next one is a very against evil alignment. You can't even really... Well, something fell behind me, but that's what it is. They heard me talking crap. Another one that also lives in the Shadowfell are blight dragons. They're a little bit more prominent in their features, having a lot of pointy ends and rusty scales, usually confused with bronze dragons. But they also have dust that kind of goes around them for different blight things. The reason why they're practically only evil alignment is because they're pretty malevolent and hate light, thus being in Shadowfell. If you're around them and everything with their little light capabilities, they have the knack for stealing life force, or life force. Of course, healing themselves in the process. Dust storms technically are made because of all this blight that swirls around them. If anything, you can even have that be a sort of an area effect scale of perhaps your party think it's just a regular dust storm until they start getting worse and worse and worse in their health and capability. Breath weapon mostly being fire and everything like that. A lot of their domain effects for what they are can incite fear into the party as well. And because they're pretty much like the bullies and jerks of Shadowfell, they will initiate a fight, often dive bombing the party, especially with their breath weapon. Dust storm creation around to try and sap you from strength. The only reason why they would leave is if they thought they were going to be overwhelmed or they're low health. Their tendency is to spread death and destruction around, and they'll see to it for that. This is one of the cases where you can have them be a true sort of creature or villain character, having it be a very much, if you want a good battle for your party, you'll most likely use this one, especially because it can lead to different story elements of perhaps they're the reason why this small little village was trying to be made in the wetlands of Shadowfell. And of course that didn't last, because who would try to make village in the Shadowfell? There's different notable ones. I haven't, of course, used one of these. I don't really have a reason yet for parties to be in the Shadowfell. I wish I did have a reason, but since most of my stuff are homebrew, I don't really have the Shadowfell yet. Almost similar areas, but not entirely. Now, one of my favorite. I kind of draw a little bit whimsical. I'm gonna draw them a little silly. Well, these little chaotic. Well, it really depends. They're definitely usually always chaotic. You can make that chaotic good, chaotic evil, chaotic neutral. It really depends. Most of the time you'll see that they get told that they're only one way of chaotic good. A lot of source books may say that. But whenever there's a chaotic alignment possibility, I like to think that they can be much more story-wise. Chaotic alignment tends to be a very fun thing to experiment with. Fairy dragons. They're related more towards pseudo dragons and capable of using language. A lot of times you will have them involved with the Fae realm or little ancient areas, adding riddle and trickery to the party. Technically, you can vary them in size. You can have them be very small or very big, despite what a rulebook says. Because to me, I think they're a wonderful tool when it comes to riddles and games, and really challenging the party's aspect for puzzles. Most of the time, they're very small compared to other dragons, though. Yeah, even if you want them to be the size of like a little pet, that is very much possible. Though if you have a warlock that has an imp companion, best believe it's gonna get bullied by the fairy dragon. They're mostly considered iridescent, most of the time having like a blue or a green sort of base to them, but going and branching off into different colors, especially when reflecting in light. So if you have them in the Fae realm or the Prominent realm, they can be a very chameleon sort of figure. Most of the time, yes, different very long tails, different butterfly winged aspects. I like making their horns be mimicking like a butterfly's wings as well, just bone. And especially one of the beautiful indicators that you can do is with different various sizes, you can also do varying colors to result in age, so that the party can kind of guess, oh, even though this one is very small, we can't bully it because it is an actual rainbow. They will probably destroy us. Especially because if it's more violet tinge, that's usually considered an elder. 1 second. I have seen a message. Give me one. Fairy dragons, they're very... Yeah, a lot of it would say they're only chaotic good, but I feel like you can do anything with it. Bum, 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 bum. Goodness. Okay. Yeah, so they tend to be the more prankster ones of the groups. Especially even though you have the pranksters starting to come forward with the metallic dragons. These ones, yeah. Especially in the wild, they're pranksters. Because of their size and their coloring and everything like that, they usually try to keep a distance from parties, using their magical abilities and everything to confuse the party, misdirect them. Some can phase in and out between planes. Banishment, whatever that spell is, can bring them back though. They prefer magic though, because they like to keep their distance, be kind of away from them. I often have had fairy dragons being an influence into terror in my homebrew campaign. However, those that have played in that homebrew never really got to experience them. A little bit. Some of the NPCs have, at least. most of the time you'll see them making allies with others, even if it's not another dragon, since a lot of dragons are territorial. Their breath weapon being very euphoria. You can have them sort of getting the fear, having them stop in place, wandering off. Most of the stuff they'll do are very illusion-based spells. Even stuff like Mage Hand. A lot of it is very close together, keeping people away. And then most of the time, they're very much high off the ground. So ancient places are full of trees and hideaway things, they will most likely be there, hiding up in the canopies. Another lovely one that usually is put towards the Feywild are the Mirage Dragons. They're very pretty. A lot of times they get talked as being like a Quetzalcoatl. They're kind of an odd shape. Because they kind of have like wedge-shaped heads. But they're very long. Long boys. Their wings were rather small, so in a lot of things, yeah, you can have them be mistaken for Quetzalcoatls. Quetzalcoatl. They mostly have like a lot of feathered looks to them. Little feathery bit here and there. Here's a little noodly. Most of the time they're very reclusive. That's very much against the fairy dragons, who will like to troll the party, but they do so at a distance. These are very reclusive and independent in nature. The Eladrin and other elves are considered very much allies to them because of different conflicts that you can have in the campaign. Different species that are considered close to Fae, like satyrs and everything, and the elves and the Eladrin especially, they will hold into a companionship like, oh, we're allies, make sure no one comes near me. And because of that, they don't really have an alignment, or at least they're not loyal to anything. They pretty much are the more selfish ones, especially because they want that seclusion. Due to that, they can be manipulative or cruel just to get their way. And unlike the fairy dragons, they wholly rely on their illusion-based spells. Different ones are different than a party would know either, so you can surprise a party with that, not really knowing what to deal. If anyone rolls Arcana, you can have it very hard for them to figure out what is going on. This makes them harder to attack, because if you have a lot of illusionary based skills and abilities happening, that tends to make it very frustrating very quickly. Their breath weapon being a more mental-based ones to take psychic damage because of it. Some of these even will use more teleportation magic, so if you ever wanted a party to learn how to use that, perhaps they got on the good side of one. So most of the time they won't interact with one directly. This is another one that would avoid fighting because of their reclusive nature. If anything, they would rely more on their breath skills and magic. And because of their close ties with the Eldrins, depending on how your campaign is, they can be close companions or even a means for the Eldrin to use as steeds. Though saying a steed is kind of funny. If anything, they are more like in a pact with them. And again, like the fairy creature, the fairy dragons, they like to be much more in forested areas. Wow, it's hard to speak today. Before my power came back on, I was napping. I'm very sleepy today. This one you can have it involved in a lot of your puzzle games. Because since they are often mistaken for Quetzalcoatlus and everything like that, you can have this being a larger figure in your puzzles. It can be of them, of different things, etc, etc. These other dragons you might have to look up here and there, because you will most likely find them in different creature compendiums rather than a formal thing in the rule books. Or it is, but it's more like it's a creature rather than something larger. Because the astral dragons, you won't really have a lot of reason why the astral plane comes into play in your games, but they're fun nonetheless. Because you have different ones like co-dragons, ectoplasmic dragons, and pack dragons that were from the astral plane. The only reason why you may have them involved is maybe they're part of a magical item. Perhaps one of them has a voice locked away into a magical item that renders influence to the party. Perhaps this item was a part of that horde for that dragon, and then it somehow ended up in this other plane of existence. There's different sort of creatures that you can have in astral plane. So having astral dragons is more so even rarer than talking about gold dragons and silver dragons. There's also ethereal dragons, but again, like the astral dragons, they will hardly come into your gameplay. They're very fun to talk about though. Well, for me, because if it isn't so obvious, dragons are my favorite thing. So D&D ones, I will literally go through every single one if I could, but I'm trying to keep it a bit more grouped. Even then, I could literally read from Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, but no. That is something I'm not sponsored to do, but maybe one day. Big dreams, big dreams. I have many dragon figures on my desk as well. Even the Outer Planes has a lot of different creature mentions, like if I bring up the Forgotten Realms wiki. Let me see here. I won't show it on screen though. Oh yeah, see, that was easy. There's different dragons for outer planes, like battle dragons, radiant dragons, adamantian dragons, Elysian, boreal, beast, howling, hellfire, pyroclastic, rust, Styx. Then you can even go into the different demonic planes and lower planes of existence, like Frostforge worms that were demonically twisted white dragons that could be found in the abyss. Chaos dragons were Nimbo. Concordant dragons in the outlands. There's very many. And a lot of the times these won't even show up in gameplay. A lot of these are considered just little creatures, but unfortunately most gameplay will never see them. Whew. I kept burping. Now, one of my favorite ones. Gem dragons. Bam, bam, bam. I'm gonna draw very generic dragon. Meh. Meh. Amethyst dragons. They're usually the first explained in a lot of different resources, so I'll just start with them anyways. Because of being purple, which is usually regal, they are regal. They're wise figures. And a lot of the alignments for gem dragons, honestly, you can mess around as much as you want. Technically, they would say they're more chaotic, sometimes evil, but Gem dragons, the reason why I say is you can play by how you wish, is because you can very much use gem dragons for Dragonborn, for your party members. Even in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, they have a whole section where you can use them for your Dragonborn, giving different attributes, statistics, abilities you can use, different breath weapons involved. And I believe... Hold on, let me look. You do not see it, but I have the book in front of me now. It is my holy text. Where is it? Dragonborn, where are you? Character creation. Very good. A lot of this also will be located in Forgotten Realms. Yeah. As another interesting trait that Gem Dragon Dragonborn have is Psionic Mind, where they can send telepathic messages to a creature you could see within 30 feet. Gem Flight as well, where starting at 5th level, you can use your bonus action to manifest spectral wings on your body. The different gem ancestry, being amethyst, crystal, emerald, sapphire, and topaz, really changes your breath weapon type you get. Amethyst, in this case, gives you force damage. Crystal gives radiant. Emerald gives psychic. Sapphire gives thunder, and Topaz gives necrotic. To which even Fizzbands has if you are dragonborn and other various things like chromatic and metallic, and also gives the information for that as well. For amethyst dragons though, before I started going on a rant about everything else, they're usually lavender hues, this and that, often looking like they are part of gemstone material. With age they will become darker though, so you can have them very light when they're young and then adjusted per segment of being a wormling all the way to an elder drake. Amethyst dragons were often the more wise ones and regal, but they never really cared for whatever conflicts are going on during a campaign. So if anything, I would have them more chaotic neutral or even true neutral because of this. Chaotic because of the fact that you may view it for being chaotic in nature, selfish and to themselves, but a little bit more true neutral. They didn't really care for conflicts going on between good, evil, chaos, law, you know, the whole alignment chart. They rather talk things out, especially because they will find amusement in the party, for example. Despite preferring talking and everything, they will be against things like retreating and ambushing. So if you were getting into a fight, it would be to the death, because retreat meant you are dishonored. Breath weapons for them have different sort of reports. A lot of the gem dragons, you can kind of mess around with their breath weapons, because some will say, oh, they shriek like a banshee, like the vibrations of gemstones being knocked around. Some would say lethal power. Some would only be able to do it certain times in the day. It very much varies. You can use the manner of its being force damage and then describe it however you will. It has no specific look for a lot of the gem dragons. A lot of the times they will have even a like sort of cannon breath weapon where they launch that gem forward and that gem will burst with that sort of damage that they do. And because they're force-based magic, they're usually immune or resistant, depending on age. So things like magic missile, stuff like that, it just won't work as well. Which magic missile, that's usually a 100% hit ability, but if you're going against an amethyst dragon, it's not going to do much. But it's not only that. Gem dragons also have a little bit more immunities than that. For amethyst, it's not just force damage, it's also stuff like poisons and usually being able to breathe underwater. But the breathing underwater, sometimes people say, is only for topaz dragons, because a lot of the time when rule books get adjusted later on, things are like, well, this is now the rule in formal. But honestly, if you're just playing with friends or people that don't mind, I don't think it matters. Rule books only being a sort of encouraged thing. A lot of the times you can have the gem dragons being a part of a magical items and their hoard, kind of adjusting that around. Oh, the amethyst from Amethyst Dragon is very force damage infused. A lot of them could even shapeshift more. And another, oh, what was the ability? Maybe it's in Fizz Bounds, but there's also this gemstone rapier that takes a horn from a gemstone dragon, or no, a spine, I believe. And that basically the rapier will then do the damage of that specific dragon. So for the Amethyst Dragon, it will use force damage. I did have a party member that had that. And the rapier originally was not for Amethyst, but the party member loves purple, so we made it Amethyst. So they were able to do force damage. That was something sort of they could eventually interact more with dragons, and if around any dragon they would have realized that this character had something created from a dragon's spine, to which that was going to create a lot of different, I wouldn't say conflict, but points of matter of question. They would have been like, why do you have something that is a part of dragon ancestry? So with that, you can have it do force damage, you can have it infused with different telekinetic spells, psionic abilities. There's a lot of different things you can play with that, especially if you make a weapon out of it. I believe that rapier might be only for crystal dragons when it comes to looking it up, but you can technically make it any of them. If you want to be fun and creative. I'm gonna be kind of cheeky and just shift the colors instead of redoing these. Any pauses I take is drinking coffee, because coffee is what is keeping me going. Emerald Dragon. Emerald Dragons, despite Amethyst being wise, Emerald Dragons are more sage-like and knowledgeable. Again, with the whole age thing from Wormling to Ancient to Elder and such like that, they will change in the hardness of the scales. The older they are, the more gem they are. Specifically with emerald ones, they look like they're constantly moving, like their scales are, which can be very beautiful. These will most likely do have a bit of more interaction with party members or NPCs, as they're very inquisitive and keen mind. They will like to continuously gather knowledge, and even would exceed different scholars in the campaign. So if you had a lot of various, like, oh, the Cobalt Soul, or different sort of factions that are known in D&D to be very knowledge-based, if you have an Emerald Dragon involved, they probably know way more than him. Oftentimes, because of this, they rather not get involved in conflict, but rather observe, record. And because of that, they will be paranoid and distrusting of any visitors, especially if it is to their lairs or wherever they have homage. Their knowledge is pretty much one of their biggest hoard things. So good luck trying to be friendly, but also good luck on trying to get their knowledge as well. Most of the times they won't care. They will be elusive and away from you. They like to observe, so they take interest in the knowledge of others. If anything, you can use that to bait them into a conversation. Most of the time they won't really get involved. Again, with the whole discussion of breath weapons being more sound-based and different various vibration or how you wish to look, it'll also be very different for emerald dragons. Since they're more sonic damage and everything, they're immune to sonic spells. And with how their scales tend to look like it's constantly moving since the refraction of green light, some may see it as more of like a mirage of grass or of the green sea. And sometimes they can have it as a hypnotizing factor against different creatures and party members. Often, even though their breath weapon is usually a more sand-based ones, they can make a cloud of fog to sort of blind opponents. Often you can combine that as well with the refractions of light from their scales. Have it a very haunting sort of layer, or, oh, this place definitely has a lot of spooky, necrotic things going on, when in fact it doesn't. Most of the gem dragons, they get more magical powers as they age as well. And because of the whole sonic and different abilities they have, especially with it comes to hypnotizing things, you would often have things like hold person or invisibility as part of what they can do. Sonic, different things for them. A lot of the times you won't have a character that has the ability to read mind be able to read them. They're pretty much immune to stuff like that. Most of the time you'll have dragons be kind of away from each other and definitely keeping their distance despite age. Most of the time even wormlings will be by themselves. However, emerald dragons were very protective as parents. So it is not insane to have them involved with multiple of each other. If anything, you can even argue that if you have a dragonborn that is an emerald dragon and you face an emerald dragon out in the wild, they would be a little bit more kind to talking with you all. And despite layers and territory and everything, they would get along with the sapphire ones, I believe, a little bit more. Which sapphire is the next ones. Blah, blah, blah. My coffee's almost done. No. Tragic. Coffee is amazing. And the funny thing about emerald dragons being with like sapphire dragons being okay with them, sapphire dragons are usually more territorial and antisocial. Antisocial. So it's pretty much like the pairing of one being a ray of sunshine and the other being the grouchy one. That's kind of what their dynamic is. Sapphire dragons are more warlike and loves to be a part of strategy. they'll even let large spider creatures being in their layers. Sometimes making like a negotiation tactic with the spider creatures, and also times eating them as well. They're one of the more... I wanted to use one so badly, but I couldn't justify a reason that they had them, since they're very territorial, and I have lots of dragons involved in my main homebrew concept. Especially because they have the different blue... Oh, something happened. 1 second. Okay, there we go. There's a lot that will happen. Okay, fixed whatever was happening. I really wanted to use them because I love blue, and they're various shades of blue with their scales. Often in light, you can have their scales even emit this starburst sort of look underneath. So I thought that would be super freaking cool to have involved in sort of Twilight concepts. Sometimes you can have them mistaken for blue dragons, but I felt like that's kind of... No, they deserve a lot more rep because they're friggin' cool. Especially because the tips of their horns are disconnected from the rest of the horns and sort of float there. Even in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, the artwork for Dragonborns, a couple of them have that sort of... The tips of their horns sort of levitate away from the horns. I think that's such a cool concept. And that way you can also have it based off of their emotions. Those little objects of them bouncing up and down when they're happy, kind of vibrating when they're angry. You can really play around with that sort of thing. Again, their breath weapons are more sound-based. The funny thing about when you look up sapphire dragons, it really does display a lot of their eating habits. Because not all of them will talk about eating habits for them, but they're just like, no, sapphire dragons love to eat giant spiders. 1 second, I'm gonna adjust my chair. It keeps creaking weirdly. There we go. A lot of these will be underground ones, since gemstones are found underground, so that's something easy you can have to incorporate. Gemstones underground, these are underground. Just the terrain is various. Sapphire ones having very much a labyrinth sort of to their tunnels and chambers. And with all the dragons, their layers are very warped to their style of magic. Especially with sapphire dragons themselves, you would often, if you stumbled into their lair, it'll be very hard to get out. You may have to use magic if it's not getting interrupted, or use a physical means to dig yourself out. And because of their levitating horns, they can pretty much do the same to the different gemstones and rocks in their layers. Especially to manipulate and go around and be purely undetected by those walking in. They can sort of almost seem like they're part of the walls. And one of their funny things, the Forgotten Realms likes to talk about for Sapphire ones especially, is because of their strategic selves and military sort of mindset. They get at odds with a lot of creatures, especially because they're psionic capillaries. So aberrations and mind flayers don't like them. They also like to antagonize drow and dwarves. I believe, let me look on this wiki. I had brought it up specifically because I knew sapphire dragons are a bit funny. Yeah, it's often a favored monster of a variety of the deities. Deities. Blah, 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 blah. Ah, there we go. Our next very selfish dragon. The topaz dragon. So I think they're honestly pretty funny to have involved into campaigns. Usually they're known to be very selfish and unsociable. They're not really considered evil in a sense because they're malevolent and selfish. Or not malevolent, but they are selfish, is what I mean. They don't really have an interest to interact, so they will most likely try to keep their distance. But with how erratic they behave, if you do get involved, they can be very dangerous because of that. A lot of their breath weapon is a little bit less of the sound base, but more of dehydration. And due to that, they're also naturally immune to stuff like cold spells. And could breathe water, like previously mentioned with Sapphire. Nope, the other one. Being able to breathe water, these ones are usually able to breathe water. Their breath weapon being dehydration is also the funny part, because their breath weapon looks like water, but no. And due to a lot of what they do, they have a lot of weather-based magic they can use. Fog clouds, different wall of fog, or any really water-based ones. But they also have this tendency, unlike the others, that they can also learn various magics as well. Usually arcane divine stuff like that can really adapt from watching a party. Oh. Okay, my frames went down for a moment there. There we go. And because they're very recluse and everything, they will even abandon their kin. You'll most likely find them on the coast, though. They're ones, like, even though the information about them is a little bit minimized, it's because they're very selfish and to themselves. I think because of how the power and everything went out today, my stream is being very wonky with frames right now. So if I'm clipping around or having dramatic pauses, that's why. But no worries, we still go on. The next one's being crystal dragons. And they're more the friendlier ones of the gem dragons. Especially because they like to conversate. They like to talk. Especially to other creatures. Sometimes not to a party, but sometimes they will. They're very light-colored, milky, even glossy, becoming more and more translucent as they age. They don't go out of their way to find this sort of companionship or talking, but they will enjoy visitors. So if you wanted the party to have a very neutral figure that won't bite their head off immediately, this could be an interesting one to have involved into your party. But only if, of course, the party members were being very neutral and wanted to engage and not was trying to rob their hoard. They will even employ tactics like charm person against your party, just to do that. Even at times, because of this, they're a little bit mischievous, but on a playful manner. Especially with being involved in mountaintops or snow forts. Their breath weapon is a little bit more interesting as well. It emits different points of crystals, little fluttering, levitating crystals that refracture light everywhere. This basically makes a cone of light. So the light can blind, or as they age, the shards can be employed to harm. But it's mostly like dazzle dazzle. Because of this, they're pretty much immune to light-based stuff. And okay with cold. Because they are very much like to conversate and not really get into horrible things, they will most likely have abilities like charm person and different ways to sort of hold person or reading minds and stuff like that, because they really rather conversate. The fun fact about them is with the whole parenting thing, these ones will have varies from 2 to 5 children per clutch. Though they're a bit, they'll have the children and then they'll forget about their children. Not as like a mean thing, but they're just a little bit irresponsible. They're very much fun in the sense that you can have them evolved in different, oh, the beautiful thing atop the mountain, or something very whimsical in the snow. Then the next one is obsidian dragons. Obsidian dragons are very much the wild card in the gem dragons. They're considered the more intelligent and the more dangerous ones of the gem dragons. But because of them being the more dangerous and intelligent ones, they're very arrogant, quick to anger, usually cruel. Different rule books will say they even play with their kills their prey. So if you have a dragonborn that is part obsidian, they will most likely have the same temper issues as well. A lot of their layer actions, or if you're in the environment and everything, will have fear-inducing effects. They're also pretty much immune to fire-based damage, but then vulnerable to ice. So you can have that sort of evening out thing. One little thing about them, like the fairy dragons, they have the ability to innately shift between material and different realms, or planes of existence, I should say, rather than realms. They also have a bunch of different abilities in their repertoire that you won't really see available to party members. Plane shifting as well makes them a little bit more crafty in what they like to do. They're not exactly opposed to combat, but it's like they would go all the way. Because they're intelligent, they can make good analysis of it and pretty much attack military-wise, plan things out, know what to do against your party members. They may even view you a little bit to decide to figure out what they want to do, or just go head on into a fight. They will be smart about it though. If they feel like they should retreat, they may. One of the things that they do, because of the plane shift, you can even have them pretty much kidnap a party member and inject them into another plane of existence. However, that may be a little bit too cruel, but it would be hilarious. Especially if you take someone and just kind of boot them into the Feywild. That'd be a little bit... You can't see it, but I put a thumbs up. You'll most likely find them, because they're immune to fire-based stuff, you'll find them in more warm areas in mountains, especially like volcanic sort of areas. Or even having the shifting ability to go to the plane of fire. In some rulebooks and everything, they could even make their own little demi-planes of existence. They're pretty much something you can have really involved, but not entirely. Let's see here. Let me go down my list. I had to find my favorite one. I left my favorite of the gem dragons for last, because technically this one isn't really involved yet, or it kind of can be, but it's one of the more new additions. This one was pretty much the basis. I don't know if Opal did come in here, but it will be a spoiler for Opal. D&D Greer was based off a Moonstone Dragon. Moonstone dragons are one of the more large gem dragons. For Greer, being in the homebrew campaign, Greer could shift from that form to just a humanoid form to kind of interact and this and that. I think they're one of the more beautiful ones. As wait, let me here. Let me just so one of the fun things about them is their horn kind of does this little thing. They pretty much have a very forward facing horn. and a tip to their nose to make this like a crescent-shaped moon. Then they have a lot of fur sort of hair bits that go down, having a long tail that has that sort of fur bits. I get really excited about these. They're very teal in their scales and everything, more elegant. Yeah, different concept arts are very beautiful in them. I left them for last because I had to directly look them up because of their more newer edition. They're pretty much a very opalescent pale silver of their skin and everything, but the ruffs of fur are like an emerald green that run down here and there, very like moss-like. So in the homebrew, Greer had those sort of tendencies and beautiful aspects. That's why when in the script thing yesterday it was hinted at, but in D&D, Opal's character Cadmus, who is half blue dragon, half Argonauty, who has a fixation for gemstones, saw Greer and was just like, oh my god, you're so beautiful, or so pretty, because he kept wanting Greer's scales as a treat. Not to eat, but to have, because Greer had these very light reflective scales and everything, even though Greer was always in humanoid form. And despite how Greer was, I believe the party thought Greer was just like a altered version of a tiefling, or like very different, kind of like how Cadmus was. But little did they know it was a moonstone dragon. And this isn't like, oh, half and half like how Cadmus was. No, I had Greer as, let me see here. Greer was considered an ancient dragon. So one of the more old ones. Obviously now the not D&D Greer that the channel is themed after is not a moonstone dragon, despite me wanting that. I've had to adjust things for my own creative means, because I am not involved with Wizards of the Coast. So I'll actually read off the personality of them, because they cared very little for the affairs of humans. Young ones are very mischievous and playful. A lot of the times it's because they come from the Fey realm. They sort of grew up there, and then they can go to different planes of existence here and there. When they're more mature, they're wise and gentle storytellers, even teachers. Always curious. They're also very rare considering, so against other gem dragons, they would be the more rare ones between all of them. And they also had the capabilities to know most of the wizard spell list. Sometimes even cleric abilities or warlock abilities, depending on how you want it. Being a part of the Fey realm or having grown up there, you can learn a lot of trickery from that. They could also be one of the ones to even learn Revivify. And one of the fun things, a layer action you can do for them that I thought is hilarious, and I never got to use it against them, is that a layer action can to compel your enemies to dance, to incapacitate them. So that was always a fun part that I never got to use. They're also technically one of the ones, because they're a bit of a newer thing, they can have various breath weapons. One being the light motes that will have them sort of What was it again? Let me see. It would put them to sleep. So one of the breath weapons would be a mote of light sort of things that would daze the enemies and put them to sleep, only having a brief sort of recollection of ever meeting the dragon. And another one being just knock them unconscious. Another being more like moonlight. So it's really various in what you want to do for the Moonstone Dragons. They're more of a mystical one, so their aura wasn't fear, but awe. So one of the things you can kind of do is, it's not really an illusion, but in a way it's like passive hold person, where affected ones would stand there, stare, but then their memory will be wiped clean after the effect passes of the creature. One of the big things about them, the party never figured it out, but one of the basic sort of environmental effects, since a lot of the dragons have environment things, the closer you get to their layers, Greer in D&D had this effect into play often, and the party never realized it. They have very much odd dreamlike magic that they can do. Either they appear in people's dreams, or they can sort of peer into other people's dreams, alter dreams, speak with them, influence things, and all the times they will have that ability to communicate. Greer themselves in D&D just knew a lot of languages anyways. They even would sort of, depending on how you wanted to play as a Moonstone Dragon as an NPC, maybe they gave advice, maybe they were cryptic. And because of this, they can enter dreamscapes at will. If you were in their lair as well, they could banish you. So that was always a fun thing I wanted to use. Combat wise, most of the time you can really play it vice versa, since it's newer, on how you would like them interact, but they would not be opposed to using teeth and claw, but they still had a lot of magic to use. But unfortunately, they are vulnerable to a lot of elemental magic. Bright light especially would hurt them, and most of the time they would have to go to a different plane to heal. So despite being very crafty and wonderful to use, if say the party were to ever fight Greer in D&D, I would even say Opal would have more of a chance against Greer, but Opal will never know that. I believe Opal's sleeping still. Most of the time they're very secretive, and they will stand guard more towards the Sylvan regions, being around Fey areas, dense forests, fairy courts. They like to influence the material plane of making companions of various people, inspire artists, poets, great thinkers. They may spur the party on to adventure using their dreams to kind of see them flip and fly around. Greer in D&D had a lot of influence within Sater, especially Sildar City, where all of this was going down. Greer often, like yesterday was hinted at in the script writing, could get out of trouble often, but that's because Greer's criminal group that they were the leader of, the group wasn't necessarily actually bad. It just kind of rooted out all the other actually bad groups within the city. So Greer would get caught, talk with Omra and rat them out. Greer would get freed. Those that worked under Greer were people that had no job and were in sore places but had a lot of hope. And Greer would see that in their dreams and then give them the offering like, hey, if you play this role and help me find out the actual bads of this city, then I'll give you monies. So Greer was a very chaotic neutral figure and would help the city because Greer didn't like all of the extra noise that a lot of the more villainous characters would bring about. So Greer wasn't necessarily, oh, I'm doing good because I'm good, but more so, I just want other things to stop so I can enjoy this city that's so pretty. And Greer would consider the city part of their lair. Because officially Greer had their own lair more north to the city, but was just like, oh, but I own this city as well. That is mine. They also didn't really care much. Like, Moonstone dragons, usually, a lot of the dragons like gold and stuff like that in their hordes, but these ones would prefer more lighter colors of silver, platinum, and even mithril, depending if your campaign has mithril involved. But a lot of the big parts of them is that they enjoy art, songs, happy time stories, paintings, or even more meaningful things like a lock of hair of someone important to them. So for Greer being an NPC in D&D, Greer coveted a lot of the city because it's just like, oh, this very culturally rich and artistically beautiful city of having all these elves, dwarves, satyrs, and different creatures involved, creating wonderful works of art, often having festivals and dances. Greer is just like, oh, all of this is my horde now. I'm going to make sure it's protected, but I'm not going to let them know I'm protecting them. The only one that basically knew that Greer was actually like neutral and not actually a villain was Omra, who is the leader of the owls. And of course those that worked under Greer. They're also considered not carnivorous, really. One of the interesting things about their diet that they consider is moonbeams, so you can have that be various different ways of collecting moon. So in D&D, moon magic and lunar magic was a very big thing. What in the world? Okay. You didn't hear that. My loop wasn't on for the background, and it started playing the next video in my like list. Hopefully I don't get a boot in my butt for that, but it should be fine. It was only like a couple seconds. Let's see. So moonbeams is part of the diet, but also nectar. They like to drink a lot of nectar and fruit and have all of that. Then, of course, being involved with the Feywild and ethereal planes. They often are said to make their lairs in fairy mounds or in woodland caverns. And they're also one of the ones that are most likely to make several lairs. So Greer having the one passively above Sildar City, having one in the Feywild, and then also considering the city as one as well. Having different portals involved as well. There's also some fun rumors and legends that I will read off of, involving moonstone dragons. One of them being that they first hatched from eggs of a clever dragon who fled to the Feywild to hide her clutch. Then that their tears were drops of mithril, and elves used them to fashion chainmail. Another is when one died, it vanished into moonbeams. When the one died well, its heart turned into a lump of pure adamantine. If one killed a creature unjustly, it was then turned to a sand and its spirit was destroyed. So there's a lot of story and whimsy considering from the Moonstone Dragons. So I'm very happy. They're in Fizban's Treasury of Dragons at least, but I don't know if it's technically able to be a Dragonborn. But honestly, you can do what you want. The last one is a very quick subject to go through, which is the lung dragons, or also known as oriental dragons. Most of these you only have in specific campaigns. But the only big thing about them is that they don't have breath weapons. They mainly use magical abilities. And can also detect thoughts. They could turn invisible at will and polymorph whatever they want. And unlike chromatic and metallic dragons, they have a wide range of what their moral alignment would be. You will find them in specific campaigns as well, since they're oriental dragons. There's not as much information on them since they're very specific. So that's a lot you would have to look into yourself. Then there's a lot of miscellaneous dragons that I brought up the page for to briefly go over. Stuff like air dragons, deep dragons, force dragons, moon dragons, radiant dragons. Again, a lot of these can be just considered creatures rather than entities. Lesser ones having dragon turtles and drakes, worms, pseudo-dragons, wyverns. Then there's many related creatures when it comes to these. In D&D, I had a lot of these considered as involved creatures, but not directly involved with the party. They unfortunately didn't get to the point where dragons were greatly involved in the history of what the campaigns for the large homebrew I did would have gone into. The homebrew would eventually gotten more into the sickness for the dragons that led them into having a bit of a madness and doing things they really wouldn't have done before. Not really making alignments with one another, but instead going to war at one another that would be very cataclysmic for everything else around them. Greer would have been one of the ones that was less impacted, but slowly impacted because of Greer being an ancient. And other dragons that caused this, it would have been a whole mystery thing if the party wanted to get involved or not. They did get to a point where they interacted with a dragon afflicted by this when they were in a lower region and interacted with a white dragon and killed it. They could have done a very passive notion and found out something was very wrong. Instead, they fought it and killed it. Dragons usually are very few in campaigns, but I think they have a lot of creative function. I was trying to do a whole homebrew of having them be very much more involved. Hopefully one day I get the opportunity to tap into that part again of having them more involved. They really are one of my more favorite things to have in storytelling. And if I can have an argument and way and use them, I will. Because they're very much a wonderful aspect to have. And I will continuously have them involved. Yes, yes, yes. Let's see. There's also, besides Bisman's Treasury of Dragons, there's also the Tyranny of Dragons, like I mentioned, to get involved with. A lot going over Tiamat. Ooh. And then looking at the contents for Fizbones, there's a lot of character creation that you can have involved. Lore-wise, dragon magic, dragons in play, layers and hordes, the Draconomicon, a bestiary, and different sidebars of information. It's a wonderful book to have, especially if you want different storytelling aspects to get involved with, but also the artwork in it is wonderful. Yeah. Alrighty, I believe I will be starting to wrap this up a bit. Because despite there being much more I can go over, would be very repetitive to go through every single dragon related creature or minorly related creature. There is many that can have relation or involvement. Bam, bam, bam. Moonstone's definitely my favorite though. I think besides that, I do like sapphire ones because of the starburst sort of appeal to them. And I do very much like fairy dragons, but only because my favorite was fairy dragons until Moonstone existed. Then I was very much, oh yeah, Moonstone for sure. Alright, here. This will be the wrap-up portion. So, dragons in D&D can be a very crucial or very not really their subject. It's up to you to have them to how you wish, but you can also take inspiration and creativity from their involvement for different writing styles and media that you pursue. If I could, or I mean I could, but if I do, I would have made a whole stream of just talking about dragons involved in any kind of media, of movies, of books. There's so much that you can cover. Oh, but this is a D&D stream. I have too many figures. I have a lot of Maleficent figures. I have figures from... Oh my, I won't even get started. They're very wonderful and they should be involved in more media. Especially D&D. So, have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Have a wonderful night, however time it is for you all. And I will leave you with some music for your rest of your day. Have a good one. Thanks for joining.